Hello friends, I never thought I would be the kind of person to post something like this online, but I guess life has a way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect it. Maybe I need to get this off my chest, or maybe I just need to hear from people who have been through something similar. Either way, here I am, laying it all out for strangers to read because I feel like my world has been turned upside down. That I have been married to my wife, Amanda, for 9 years. We met in our mid-20s, and from the moment I saw her, it felt like the world had shifted beneath my feet. She had this magnetic energy that could draw anyone in, smart, confident, and with a smile that could light up the darkest room. Our relationship moved fast, but it always felt right. Within a year, we were married, and life seemed perfect. At least, that is what I told myself. The first few years were great. We built a life together, buying a house, adopting a dog, and falling into the rhythm of shared routines. Amanda worked as a marketing manager for a local company, and I managed a small construction business. Our schedules were busy, but we made time for each other. Friday nights were our thing: dinner, a movie, or just relaxing at home with a bottle of wine. It was our time to reconnect after the chaos of the week, but somewhere along the line, things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Amanda began going out more often, happy hours with coworkers, networking events, and weekend meetups with friends I had never heard of before. She assured me it was all part of building her career, and I wanted to believe her. I trusted her. Or at least, I tried to. The first time I felt that gnawing doubt in my chest was about 6 months ago. Amanda had started frequenting this upscale bar downtown, a trendy place with craft cocktails and a live jazz band on weekends. She claimed it was the perfect spot to unwind after work, a place where her colleagues liked to gather and talk shop. At first, I thought nothing of it. I had been there a couple of times myself, and it seemed like a nice place. But then the late nights started to stack up. At first, it was once a week, then twice, then 3 times. Her explanations became vaguer, her return times later. She would come home smelling of perfume and something else, something unfamiliar that lingered in the air long after she had gone to bed. When I asked why she was going out so often, she would brush it off with a laugh, saying I was overthinking things. She needed to unwind after work, and besides, it was harmless, but the distance between us grew wider with every night she spent away. Our Friday nights became less frequent, replaced by her impromptu outings that always seemed to pop up at the last minute. When I tried to talk to her about it, she would get defensive, accusing me of being controlling or jealous. She insisted that she needed her space, that she was entitled to have a life outside our marriage. Her words stung, but I tried to believe her. After all, we had built a life together. Why would she throw it all away? Still, the doubts lingered. I found myself lying awake at night, listening to the faint hum of her car pulling into the driveway long after midnight. The sound of her key turning in the lock became a trigger, sending a wave of anxiety through my chest every time it echoed through the house. I would pretend to be asleep when she slipped into bed beside me, her breath tinged with the faint scent of alcohol and something I couldn't quite place. That I started noticing other things, too: the way she would tilt her phone away from me when she texted, the sudden appearance of new clothes and jewelry she never wore around me, the way she seemed to glow with a confidence that felt unfamiliar. When I asked her about the phone, she claimed it was just work stuff, nothing I needed to worry about. But the way she said it, the way her eyes flicked away as she spoke, planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. Then there were the nights when she didn't come home at all. The first time it happened, she called to say she had too much to drink and was crashing at a friend's place. I wanted to believe her, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, as if she had anticipated my question before I asked it. The next morning, she came home with that same easy smile, brushing past my concerns with a quick kiss and a promise that it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Again and again. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. It was a Friday night, our night, and I had planned a surprise dinner at her favorite restaurant. I even bought a bottle of the wine she loved, hoping to recapture a piece of what we had lost. But as the hours ticked by, my calls went unanswered. Midnight came and went, and still, she hadn't come home. The wine sat untouched on the table, the candles burning down to pools of wax as the silence pressed against my chest like a weight. When she finally stumbled through the door at nearly 3 in the morning, her cheeks flushed and her hair tousled in a way that had nothing to do with the wind, I knew something was wrong. Her smile was a little too bright, her laughter a little too forced as she waved off my questions with a dismissive hand. She claimed she had lost track of time, caught up in conversation with friends, but her words rang hollow. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of guilt that she tried so hard to hide. That night, as I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling while her breath rose and fell in slow, steady rhythms, I knew that the truth was slipping through the cracks of our marriage like sand through my fingers. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted with my heart, was slipping away from me, piece by piece. And no matter how tightly I tried to hold on, I could feel her slipping further with every passing day, but what hurt the most wasn't the suspicion or the late nights. It was the growing certainty that the woman I loved was no longer the woman lying beside me. Somewhere along the way, she had become a stranger wrapped in the skin of the person I had promised to love forever. And the worst part? I had no idea how to bring her back. As I lay there in the darkness, listening to the faint hum of the world outside our window, one thought echoed through my mind with relentless clarity: I needed to know the truth, because the not knowing was worse than anything the truth could possibly be. The days that followed that night were a blur of doubt and unanswered questions. I found myself scrutinizing every detail, every glance, every late-night text, every moment when Amanda's phone buzzed and she quickly turned it over. The air between us seemed thicker, weighted with the things neither of us dared to say. I wanted to trust her, but the knot in my chest tightened each time her smile seemed a little too forced or her laughter echoed with a hollow edge. One evening, curiosity and desperation got the best of me. Amanda had gone out with her friends, at least, that was the story, and I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the hum of the television providing little distraction from the thoughts racing through my mind. Her phone charger lay abandoned on the kitchen counter, and the absence of its usual companion sent a wave of unease through me. I knew it was wrong to invade her privacy, but the need for answers gnawed at my resolve. Opening her laptop, I hesitated for a moment before typing in her password, a combination I had once known but now entered with a shaky hand, unsure if it would still work. The screen unlocked with a faint click, and my pulse quickened as her emails and messages appeared before me. At first, everything seemed normal: work emails, newsletters, the occasional chat with friends. But then, buried beneath the mundane, I found a thread of messages that made my breath catch in my throat. The name was unfamiliar: Jake. The bartender from the downtown bar Amanda had started frequenting. The messages were subtle at first light, teasing conversations that could have passed for harmless banter. But as I scrolled further, the words began to shift, each exchange growing more personal, more intimate. Late-night confessions, inside jokes, and shared moments that painted a picture of something far beyond casual conversation. My chest tightened with every line I read, the truth unfolding before me in stark black and white. And then I found it, the message that shattered any remaining doubt: last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. The world seemed to tilt beneath me as the words burned into my mind, the air around me suddenly too thick to breathe. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the evidence of a connection that had grown beyond anything I had feared. The timestamps told a story of late-night meetings, shared secrets, and stolen moments that stretched back further than I wanted to admit. Each message was a thread in the fabric of a betrayal that had woven itself into the heart of my marriage. The sound of Amanda's car pulling into the driveway jolted me from my trance. Heart pounding, I closed the laptop and placed it back where I had found it, my mind racing with the weight of what I had just discovered. The front door opened, and Amanda stepped inside, her cheeks flushed from the cool night air and her smile as bright as ever. But now, I could see the cracks beneath the surface, the flicker of guilt in her eyes, the hesitation in her step, as if sensing the shift in the air. I stood there, my pulse pounding in my ears as the words I had read echoed through my mind. The truth was no longer a distant suspicion, it was a reality I could no longer ignore. And as Amanda crossed the room with that familiar smile, I knew that the next step was inevitable, because now, the question wasn't whether she had betrayed me, the question was what I was going to do about it. The air in the house felt suffocating as Amanda stepped through the doorway, her cheeks still flushed from the cool night air. Her smile flickered like a faulty light bulb there, but not quite reaching her eyes. I stood motionless in the center of the room, my pulse pounding so loudly that I could hear it in my ears. The words I had read on her laptop replayed in my mind like a broken record, each syllable scraping against the walls of my chest. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as the weight of those words pressed down on me. Every beat of my heart seemed to echo with the betrayal woven into each letter. The truth was no longer a shadow lurking in the corners of my mind, it was a neon sign flashing with unrelenting clarity. And now, standing face to face with the woman who had built her life beside mine, I knew I couldn't hold the words back any longer. Amanda placed her purse on the entryway table, her movements slow and deliberate, as if sensing the shift in the air. Her gaze flicked toward me, a question lingering in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Maybe she could see it, the tension coiled tight in my shoulders, the rigid line of my jaw, the way my breath came too shallow and too fast. Or maybe she was waiting, calculating the next move in a game she thought she still controlled. That I took a step forward, my pulse thudding against my ribs like a drumbeat of impending consequences. The words hovered on the tip of my tongue, heavy with the weight of their inevitability. But when I opened my mouth, they came out slower than I expected, each one measured and deliberate, as if I could somehow control the fallout that would follow. I know about Jake. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda froze, her hand halfway to the buttons of her coat. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, her eyes widened with something that looked like fear. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the expression vanished, replaced by a carefully crafted mask of confusion and denial. Her brows knit together, and her lips parted as if forming the first notes of a well-rehearsed lie. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice pitched just slightly higher than usual. That I stepped closer, the air between us charged with the unspoken truths that hovered like static electricity. My hands trembled at my sides as the adrenaline surged through me, but I held my ground. There was no turning back now. "Don't do that," I said, my voice low and steady. "Don't stand there and lie to my face." Her eyes searched mine as if looking for a weakness she could exploit, a crack in my resolve where she could wedge her excuses. But I didn't waver. I had seen the messages, the late-night confessions, the stolen moments, the words that painted a picture of a relationship that had crossed every line. There was no room for doubt anymore. Amanda's posture shifted, her shoulders squaring as she drew herself up like a soldier preparing for battle. The confusion melted away, replaced by a sharper edge that sent a chill down my spine. Her gaze hardened, and her lips pressed into a thin line as if weighing her options. I could see the gears turning behind her eyes, calculating the best way to spin the situation in her favor. "You're being paranoid," she said, her tone clipped but controlled. "Jake is just a friend." "I don't know what you think you saw, but I read the messages," I interrupted, the words slicing through the air like a knife. She blinked, her breath hitching as the color drained from her face. For a moment, her composure slipped, revealing the cracks beneath the surface. But then, like a magician pulling a trick from their sleeve, she recovered, her expression shifting from shock to indignation. "You went through my laptop?" she demanded, her voice rising with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "How could you invade my privacy like that? I can't believe you would." "Don't turn this around on me," I cut her off, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "Don't you dare make this about my actions when you're the one who broke our marriage." The room seemed to close in around us, the walls pressing tighter with every breath. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a relentless reminder of the seconds slipping past as our marriage unraveled in real time. Amanda took a step back, her eyes flicking toward the window as if searching for an escape route. But there was none. "Not this time." "Look, it's not what you think," she said, her voice softer now, laced with just enough vulnerability to make me question the firmness of my resolve. "I've been stressed lately, and Jake, he was just someone to talk to. It never meant anything. It was a mistake, and a mistake? I echoed, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. A mistake that happened over and over again? A mistake you kept hidden while lying to my face every day? Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were born of regret or the realization that she had been caught. Either way, the damage had been done. The woman standing before me was no longer the woman I had vowed to love through better or worse. Somewhere along the way, she had become a stranger wrapped in familiar skin, a stranger whose choices had torn a hole through the center of my life. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. I took a shaky breath, my chest tight with the weight of emotions I could barely contain. Anger, heartbreak, betrayal, they all collided within me, each one fighting for dominance as I tried to make sense of the chaos that had become my life. But you did, I said, the words heavy with finality. You hurt me every time you chose him over us. Every time you lied. Every time you looked me in the eyes and pretended nothing was wrong. Amanda's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of my words, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the reality of what she had done settled over her like a lead blanket. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence thick with the echoes of everything that had led us to this moment. Finally, she stepped forward, her hand reaching for mine with a tentative hesitation that made my heart ache. But I pulled back before she could touch me, the distance between us now more than just physical. I don't know what happens next, I admitted, my voice raw with the strain of holding back the storm raging inside me. But I know one thing, I can't pretend this never happened. I can't go back to the way things were. Amanda's lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. And in that moment, I saw the truth written in her eyes, the understanding that no matter how hard we tried, some things could never be undone. The air seemed to shift, the tension ebbing slightly as the weight of unspoken truths settled between us. I turned away, my footsteps heavy as I moved toward the door. Each step felt like shedding the remnants of a life that no longer belonged to me, the echoes of what could have been fading into the distance with every breath. As I reached the doorway, I paused, my hand resting against the frame as I glanced back one last time. Amanda stood frozen in place, her shoulders trembling as silent tears streaked down her cheeks. For a moment, the urge to turn back, to offer comfort despite everything, tugged at my heart. But I knew that path led only to more pain. Without another word, I stepped through the doorway and into the night, the cool air wrapping around me as if welcoming me into a world beyond the walls of betrayal. The future stretched out before me, uncertain, yes, but free from the shadows that had clung to my heart for far too long. And as I walked away from the house that had once been my home, I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey towards something new, something honest, something mine. The night air clung to my skin as I stepped outside, the faint hum of distant traffic blending with the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. My breath fogged the air in shallow bursts as I stood motionless on the front porch, the distant glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the empty street. Behind me, the faint murmur of Amanda's sobs filtered through the closed door, muffled but unmistakable. The sound should have stirred something within me, sympathy, sorrow, maybe even guilt. But all I felt was hollow. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my pulse still thrumming in my ears as adrenaline slowly began to ebb from my veins. The confrontation had drained every ounce of energy from my body, leaving me adrift in a sea of exhaustion and disbelief. My mind replayed the moment I had uttered Jake's name, the shock that had flashed across Amanda's face before she had scrambled to regain control of the narrative. Each word, each denial, each carefully chosen half-truth clung to the air like echoes of a life that no longer belonged to me. Eventually, my legs began to move of their own accord, carrying me down the steps and into the night. The faint crunch of gravel beneath my shoes seemed unnaturally loud against the silence that pressed in from all sides. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary built on shared dreams and whispered promises, now felt like a cage closing in with every breath. My footsteps carried me through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, past houses where warm light spilled from windows and laughter drifted faintly through the air. Each glimpse of domestic normalcy twisted like a knife in my chest, a stark reminder of what I had lost, or perhaps, what I had never truly had. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my steps, the steady cadence offering a thin tether against the chaos swirling within me. But no matter how far I walked, the images followed. Amanda's flushed cheeks as she returned home in the early hours of the morning, the messages on her laptop spelling out a betrayal I could no longer deny, the way her eyes had flicked toward the window as if searching for an escape when I confronted her. The air grew colder as I wandered deeper into the night, but I barely noticed. My thoughts churned with questions that offered no answers. How long had it been going on? Had I missed the signs, or had I simply chosen not to see them? Was there a moment when I could have stopped this before it began, or had the foundation of our marriage been crumbling long before Jake entered the picture? Hours passed in a blur of dimly lit streets and empty sidewalks until exhaustion finally dragged me to a halt. I found myself standing at the edge of a small park, the faint glow of streetlights casting elongated shadows across the dew-soaked grass. A weathered wooden bench sat beneath the skeletal branches of an old oak tree, its rough surface worn smooth by countless strangers seeking solace beneath the same indifferent sky. Without thinking, I lowered myself onto the bench, the chill of the wood seeping through my jeans as I buried my face in my hands. The stillness of the night wrapped around me like a shroud, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the faint rustle of leaves stirred by the breeze. In the silence, my thoughts began to slow, the relentless churn of questions giving way to a deeper ache that settled heavy in my chest. Grief. Not just for what I had lost, but for the version of myself who had believed in forever. The man who had stood at the altar and promised to love and trust unconditionally. The man who had built a life around the woman he thought he knew. That I didn't know how long I sat there, staring blankly at the faint mist rising from the grass as the world began to lighten with the first pale hints of dawn. Somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing, its clear notes slicing through the hush of early morning like a reminder that life continued to move forward, indifferent to the heartbreak unfolding beneath its gaze. By the time I returned home, the sky had begun to shift from the gray haze of pre-dawn to the faint blush of sunrise. The house stood silent and still, its darkened windows reflecting the faint glow of the coming day. My footsteps echoed against the porch steps as I paused before the front door, my hand hovering above the handle as if the weight of what lay beyond had suddenly become too heavy to bear. Inside, the air felt thick with the remnants of the night before. The faint scent of Amanda's perfume still lingered in the hallway, mingling with the sharper tang of unspoken words that seemed to hang in the air like a fog. I moved through the house in slow, measured steps, my gaze skimming across the familiar contours of a life that no longer felt like my own. The framed photos lining the walls, the smiles captured in frozen moments of a happiness that now felt like a distant echo, seemed to mock me with their silent reminders of what had been lost. In the bedroom, Amanda lay curled beneath the blankets, her form silhouetted against the faint glow of morning light seeping through the curtains. Her breathing was slow and steady, the peaceful rhythm at odds with the storm that still raged within me. For a moment, I simply stood there, watching the rise and fall of her chest as conflicting emotions warred beneath my skin: anger, sorrow, longing, and a hollow ache that seemed to settle deeper with every breath that I turned away before the urge to wake her could take hold, retreating to the kitchen where the faint hum of the refrigerator offered the only sound in the stillness. The coffee maker gurgled softly as I filled a mug, the warmth of the ceramic offering a faint semblance of comfort as I cradled it between my hands. Yet no amount of heat could thaw the cold knot of grief that had taken root in my chest. The hours that followed passed in a haze of mechanical movements: showering, dressing, attempting to piece together the fragments of a routine that now felt like a hollow imitation of life. The weight of unspoken words pressed heavily against my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to break the silence that clung to the air like a heavy fog. Each glance exchanged with Amanda seemed to carry the echo of the night before, the unspoken knowledge of a fracture too deep to mend. By midday, the tension had become unbearable. The air between us crackled with the electricity of words waiting to be spoken, each moment stretched taut with the weight of what we both knew but couldn't bring ourselves to say. Finally, Amanda broke the silence, her voice hesitant and thin as she asked if we could talk. I nodded, though the words I needed to say felt like stones lodged in my throat. We sat opposite each other at the kitchen table, the space between us a chasm carved by every lie, every secret, every moment that had led us to this point. Amanda's hands twisted together in her lap as she searched my face for some sign of forgiveness or understanding, but I kept my gaze steady, unwilling to offer false hope where none remained. "I know I've hurt you," she began, her voice cracking beneath the weight of her own words. "I never meant for it to happen this way. I never wanted to." "Then why did you?" I interrupted, my voice rough with the strain of holding back the torrent of emotions that threatened to break free. "Why, Jake? Why lie to me over and over again?" Her breath hitched as she struggled to find an answer that wouldn't sound hollow against the weight of what she had done. But no words could erase the messages I had read, the late nights spent waiting for her to come home, the way her laughter had belonged to someone else. "I don't know," she whispered at last, tears spilling over her cheeks as her shoulders trembled with the force of her sorrow. "I was lonely. I felt like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. Jake, he made me feel wanted. Like I mattered." The words hit like a blow to the chest, knocking the air from my lungs as the full weight of her confession settled over me. Yet even as the ache deepened, a part of me recognized the truth beneath her words, the cracks in our marriage that had begun to form long before Jake had stepped into the picture. But understanding did nothing to dull the sting of betrayal. "I loved you," I said, my voice raw with the strain of holding back tears that threatened to break free. "I trusted you with everything I had. And you threw it all away." Amanda reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine with a tentative desperation that made my heart ache. But I pulled back, the distance between us now more than physical. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted, the words tasting like ashes on my tongue. "I don't know if I even want to try." The silence that followed was the sound of something breaking beyond repair, the final, irrevocable severing of a bond that had once held us together. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The woman I had loved, the life we had built, the future we had imagined, it was all gone, and all that remained was the choice of what to do next. The days that followed our conversation blurred together into a haze of half-spoken words and hollow routines. Each morning, I woke to the faint warmth of Amanda's presence beside me, but the distance between us felt more like an ocean than the few inches of mattress that separated our bodies. Her movements around the house carried the weight of unspoken apologies, silent offerings that did little to mend the fractures running deep beneath the surface of our marriage. I could see it in the way her gaze lingered when she thought I wasn't looking, the hesitant brush of her fingers against mine as if testing the strength of a bond she had already broken. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. The air in the house grew heavier with each passing day, thick with the echoes of words we couldn't bring ourselves to say. Our conversations became little more than exchanges of necessity, brief, clipped sentences that carried no warmth, no laughter, no trace of the life we had once shared. Even the smallest interactions felt like navigating a minefield, each step taken with the cautious awareness that one wrong word could send everything crashing down. That I tried to throw myself into work, hoping that the rhythm of familiar tasks might offer some semblance of stability. But the images of Amanda and Jake lingered at the edges of my thoughts, shadows that refused to be banished no matter how hard I tried to focus. Every late-night text, every whispered laugh, every stolen moment replayed in my mind like fragments of a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. Even the simple act of driving past the downtown bar where their connection had begun sent a jolt of nausea through my stomach, the neon sign above the entrance now a mocking reminder of the life that had unraveled beneath its glow. At night, sleep came slowly, if at all. I lay awake long after Amanda had drifted off, staring at the ceiling as the weight of unanswered questions pressed against my chest. How long had it been going on? Had there ever been a moment when she had considered stopping, or had each meeting only pulled her deeper into a world where I no longer existed? And perhaps the hardest question of all, had she ever truly loved me, or had our marriage been nothing more than a carefully constructed facade, destined to crumble the moment temptation knocked on her door? One evening, unable to endure the suffocating silence of the house any longer, I found myself standing outside the bar where it had all begun. The faint hum of music drifted through the air as laughter spilled from the open doorway, mingling with the distant sounds of traffic and the hum of city life. I stood motionless on the sidewalk, staring up at the neon sign that cast a pale blue glow against the wet pavement. The temptation to step inside burned beneath my skin, the need to confront the man who had helped tear my life apart, to demand answers that would likely bring no solace. But some part of me knew that no confrontation could change what had already been done. Instead, I turned away, my footsteps echoing hollowly against the pavement as I disappeared into the night. The street stretched out before me like a labyrinth of half-forgotten memories, each familiar landmark tainted by the knowledge of what had happened while I had trusted too blindly. I walked without direction, the city lights blurring into streaks of color as the ache in my chest deepened with every step. By the time I returned home, the sky had begun to shift from the deep black of midnight to the faint gray of approaching dawn. The house stood silent and still, its windows dark against the pale glow of streetlights. I paused at the front door, my hand resting on the cold metal of the handle as the weight of everything settled heavily upon my shoulders. Stepping inside, I was met with the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of floorboards beneath my feet, the only sounds that greeted me in the stillness of a home that no longer felt like mine. Amanda was waiting in the living room, her posture rigid with tension as she sat on the edge of the couch. Her gaze lifted the moment I entered, eyes searching mine with a mixture of hope and fear. The faint sheen of tears clung to her lashes, but she blinked them back, her hands twisting together in her lap as if holding on to the last threads of a bond that had already begun to unravel. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice thin and strained, as if she already knew the answer but needed to hear it aloud. I hesitated for a moment, the words catching in my throat as I tried to find a way to articulate the storm raging beneath my skin. But no explanation seemed adequate, no combination of syllables capable of capturing the hollow ache that had taken root within my chest. "Walking," I said at last, the simplicity of the answer leaving a bitter taste on my tongue. Amanda's shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of uncertainty had settled more heavily upon her with each hour I had been gone. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the words seemed to catch in her throat, leaving only the faint hitch of her breath to break the silence. "I know I've hurt you," she whispered after a moment, her voice barely more than a breath against the stillness of the room. "I know I've broken something between us, and I don't know if I can ever fix it. But I need you to know that it wasn't because I stopped loving you." The words should have offered some measure of comfort, some reassurance that the foundation of our marriage had not been entirely built on lies. But instead, they only deepened the ache within my chest, each syllable a reminder of the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. "Then why?" I asked, my voice rough with the strain of holding back the emotions that threatened to break free. "Why him? Why lie to me over and over again?" Amanda's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers curling into the fabric of her jeans as if searching for something solid to hold on to. When she spoke, her voice was low and unsteady, each word weighed down by the guilt that clung to her like a second skin. "I don't know," she admitted, the raw honesty in her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "At first, it was just attention. Validation. I felt like I was disappearing into the routine of our life, like I wasn't enough anymore. And Jake, he made me feel seen. But I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." The confession hung between us like the final note of a song that had already begun to fade, leaving only the echo of what had been lost. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that her actions had been born of weakness rather than malice, that the woman I had loved still existed somewhere beneath the layers of betrayal and regret. But the images of their late-night messages, the whispered laughter, the touch of hands that should never have met, each memory burned with a clarity that refused to be softened by words. "I don't know if I can do this," I said at last, the admission tasting like ash on my tongue. "I don't know if I can look at you and not see everything you've taken from us." Amanda's breath hitched, her shoulders trembling as silent tears traced their way down her cheeks. She reached for my hand, her fingers brushing against mine with a tentative desperation that made my heart ache. But I pulled away before she could grasp hold, the distance between us now more than just physical. "I need time," I said, the words falling heavily into the space between us. "Time to figure out if there's anything left worth saving." Amanda's lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. And in that moment, I saw the truth reflected in her eyes, the understanding that some wounds ran too deep to be healed by apologies alone. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the bedroom, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet the only sound breaking the silence. Each step felt like shedding the weight of a life that no longer fit, the echoes of what had been fading into the distance with every breath. And as I lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling while the first pale light of dawn crept through the curtains, I knew that the next chapter of my life was about to begin, whether I was ready for it or not. The next morning arrived with a stillness that felt different, like the calm that follows a storm. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale streaks across the floor as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint patterns woven into the carpet. The air between Amanda and me felt like a space too wide to cross. Neither of us spoke as we moved through the motions of the day, our words reduced to necessities exchanged with a fragile civility that neither of us dared to break. By evening, I found myself standing by the front door, my packed bag resting beside me. The weight of my decision pressed heavily against my chest, but beneath the ache of heartbreak lay a certainty I hadn't felt in weeks. Amanda stood a few steps away, her eyes searching mine for something: understanding, forgiveness, maybe even hope. But I had none left to give. "I need to go," I said, the word steady despite the knot in my throat. Amanda's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. After a moment, she nodded, her shoulders sagging beneath the weight of everything we had lost. Without another word, I picked up my bag and stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against my face as I crossed the threshold for the last time. The distant hum of traffic echoed faintly in the air, a reminder that the world outside would continue to move forward whether I was ready or not. As I walked down the driveway, the sound of the front door closing behind me felt like the final note of a chapter that could never be rewritten. And though the ache of what might have been still clung to my chest, I knew this was the first step towards something new, something honest, something whole, because sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that lead us back to ourselves.